Is there some adventure in here? I wonder. Oh, hello. My name's Lucy Brady, and I want to welcome you to Showcase of Churches, where I usually interview Christian leaders or pastors who tell me about their ministry or their church. Or I share a teaching I've written. So today our show is entitled Adventures with God. Christian life or our Bible reading doesn't have to be boring. In fact, it can be filled with adventures. So today, I hope you can just sit back and enjoy hearing about some of the adventures recorded in the Bible. All right, before that, what is the definition of adventure? An unusual or exciting, typically hazardous experience or activity, or to engage in hazardous and exciting activity, especially the exploration of an unknown territory, or a risky undertaking of unknown outcome, the thirst for a new, exciting experience. We've all heard about art or music therapy, but what about adventure therapy? Fear can be defined or reframed as excitement energizing the brain. And when the adventure is with the Lord, there can be confidence that He holds the outcome. And although fear may raise its ugly head, it can be diminished. Not saying, of course, we need to toss aside all caution or common sense in regard to safety, but I believe we can be brave and of good courage and enjoy both adventures in the Bible and the adventures the Lord can lead us into. In our modern day culture, I wonder if we sometimes live vicariously through the adventures we see on TV. I caught myself doing this during a time of injury recovery. When I had previously led at least a somewhat adventurous life, I now felt bored and wanted an adventure fix, which I could find on TV channels. However, this included a lot of violence I didn't feel so good about viewing. Then the idea occurred to me that I should reread some of the adventures in the Bible, then hope to resume my adventures with the Lord. Yeah, that might include some snowshoeing travel or exploring exciting places and cultures. I believe we could say Columbus and Lewis and Clark were adventurous, and we have the advantage of their adventurous and exploratory natures. And in the Bible, there is often an advantage to an adventure. Some may consider adventure just fun, but not fruitful. Yet in the Bible, it often is. A good example of this is when Abram shared in Hebrews 11:8-9, by faith, Abraham obeyed when he was called to go out to a place that he was to receive an inheritance. And he went out not knowing where he was going. By faith, he went to live in the land of promise, as in a foreign land, living in tents with Isaac and Jacob, heirs with him to the same promise. Now, an adventure can be a journey inviting us to trust God, embrace the unknown, and find joy in the journey. Some of the adventures we can read about in the Bible are David and Goliath, David and the lion and the bear, Paul and Silas in prison, Paul and the demon-possessed damsel, Paul and his shipwreck, Joshua in the battle of Jericho, Daniel in the lion's den, Queen Esther, and many more. While writing this, I asked friends and family to tell me, what is your favorite adventure story in the Bible? Now I will read some of the adventure stories from the Bible and may add my own comments here or there. All right, so Paul and Silas in prison, Acts 16:16-40. And it came to pass as we were in prayer, a certain damsel possessed with the spirit of divination met us, which brought her masters much gain by soothsaying. The same followed Paul and us, cried, saying, These men are servants of the Most High God, which show unto us the way of salvation. And this she did many days. But Paul, being grieved, turned and said to the spirit, I command thee in the name of Jesus Christ to come out of her. And he came out that same hour. And when her masters saw that the hope of their gain was gone, they caught Paul and Silas and drew them into the marketplace unto the rulers, and brought them to the magistrate, saying, These men, being Jews, do exceedingly trouble our city, and teach customs which are not lawful for us to receive, neither to observe, being Romans. And the multitude rose together against them, and the magistrates tore off their clothes and commanded them to beat them. And when they had laid many stripes upon them, they cast them into prison, charging the jailer to keep them safely, who, having received such a charge, thrust them into the inner prison and made their feet fast in the stocks. And at midnight, Paul and Silas prayed and sang praises to God, and the prisoners heard them. And suddenly there was a great earthquake, so that the foundations of the prison were shaken. And immediately all the doors were opened, and everyone's bands were loosed. And the keeper of the prison, awaking out of his sleep and seeing the prison doors were open, he drew out his sword and would have killed himself, supposed that the prisoners had been fled. But Paul cried out with a loud voice, saying, "Do thyself no harm, for we are all here." Then he called for a light and sprang in and came trembling and fell down before Paul and Silas and brought them out and said, "Sirs, what must I do to be saved?" And they said, "Believe on the Lord Jesus Christ, and thou shalt be saved, and thy household." I heard a modern-day experience of this when I met a couple of Romanian men who had been in prison for their faith. They were forced to be on the floor for a while. After getting up, one man had this to say, "I just got a song of the Lord." So instead of being filled with fear and feelings of persecution, he was rejoicing. And so I thought this was a modern-day thing similar to what Paul and Silas had experienced. Now, referring back to the verse about Paul casting out the spirit of divination from the woman, where her owners were making a profit from her. Although recently I've not cast out demons, I did confront a woman with a tarot card booth at a Saturday market last summer. The first week I saw a booth when she had a customer, and I just walked by and said, "You're wasting your time." The next week, I felt I should do a little bit more. So while she was alone, I went into her tent and told her I had previously been involved in the occult, but was a Christian now. I tried to appeal to her to forsake her practices, but she resisted, so I told her she might bear the consequences of her actions. Then I prayed she would remove her tarot card tent. The next week, so that Saturday market, her tent was not there. A little unexpected adventure for me. I was just a lady wearing my hat and my dress, strolling through the Saturday market, not expecting any adventure. So we just never know when these adventures might pop up. All right, now moving on to Daniel in chapter 6 in the book of Daniel. I will read of Daniel's adventure. It pleased Darius to set over the kingdom 120 princes, which should be over the whole kingdom, and over these 3 presidents, of whom Daniel was first, that the princes might give account to him, and the king should have no damage. Then this Daniel was preferred among the presidents and princes, because an excellent spirit was in him, and the king thought to set him over the whole realm. Then the presidents and princes thought to find occasion against Daniel concerning the kingdom, but they could not find none, nor fault, for as much as he was faithful. Neither was there any error or fault found in him. Then said these men, "We shall not find any occasion against Daniel, except we find it against him concerning the law of God." Then these presidents and princes assembled together to the king, and said thus unto him, "King Darius, live forever. All the presidents of the kingdom, the governors, the princes, the counselors, and the captains have consulted together to establish a royal statute and to make a firm decree that whosoever shall ask a petition of any god or man for 30 days, except you, O king, he shall be cast into the den of lions. Now, O king, establish the decree and sign the writing, that it be not changed, according to the law of the Medes and Persians, that alters not." Wherefore King Darius signed the writing and the decree. Now when Daniel knew that the writing was signed, he went to his house, and his window being open in his chamber toward Jerusalem, he knelt on his knees 3 times a day and prayed, and gave thanks before his God as he did before that. Then these men assembled and found Daniel praying and making supplication before his God. Then they came near and spoke before the king concerning the king's decree. "Hast thou not signed a decree that every man that shall ask a petition of any god or man within 30 days, except for thee, O king, shall be cast into the den of lions?" The king answered and said, "The thing is true, according to the law of the Medes and Persians, which cannot be altered." Then answered they and said before the king, that Daniel, which is of the children of the captivity of Judah, regards not thee, O king, nor the decree that thou hast signed, but makes his petition 3 times a day. Then the king, when he heard of these words, was sore displeased with himself, and set his heart on Daniel to deliver him. And he labored till the going down of the sun to deliver him. Then these men assembled unto the king and said to the king, Know, O king, that the law of the Medes and Persians is that no decree nor statute which the king established can be changed. Then the king commanded, and they brought Daniel and cast him into the den of lions. Now the king spoke and said to Daniel, Thy God, whom thou servest continually, he will deliver thee. And a stone was brought and laid upon the mouth of the den, and the king sealed it with his own signet. And when the signet of his lords, that the purpose might not be changed concerning Daniel. Then the king went to his palace and passed the night fasting. Neither were instruments of music brought before him, and his sleep went from him. Then the king arose very early in the morning and went in haste to the den of lions. And when he came to the den, he cried with a lamentable voice to Daniel. And the king spoke and said to Daniel, O Daniel, servant of the living God, is thy living God, whom thou servest continually, able to deliver you from the lions? Then said Daniel to the king, O king, live forever. My God has sent his angel and has shut the lions' mouths, that they have not hurt me. Forasmuch as before him innocency was found in me, and also before thee, O king, I have done no hurt. Then the king was exceedingly glad for him, and commanded that he should take Daniel up out of the lion's den. Daniel was taken up out of the den, and no manner of hurt was found upon him, because he believed in his God. And the king commanded, and they brought those men which had accused Daniel, and they cast them into the den of lions. Them, their children, their wives, and the lions had mastery over them, and broke all their bones and pieces, or even they came to the bottom of the den. Well, I thought this was interesting how the king said about Daniel that he served God continually. Now we'll move into another man who also served God continually, and that's Elijah. I'm going to read from 1 Kings chapter 18, verse 17 and on. And it came to pass when Ahab saw Elijah, that Ahab said to him, Art thou he that troublest Israel? And he answered, I have not troubled Israel, but thou and thy father's house, and that you have forsaken the commandments of the Lord, and thou hast followed Balaam. Now therefore send and gather to me all Israel to Mount Carmel, and the prophets Baal 450, and the prophets of the groves 400, which eat at Jezebel's table. So Ahab sent to all the children of Israel and gathered the prophets together to Mount Carmel. And Elijah came to all the people and said, How long halt ye between two opinions? If the Lord be God, follow him. But if Baal, then follow him. And the people answered him not a word. Then said Elijah unto the people, I, even I only, remain a prophet of the Lord, but Baal's prophets are 450 men. Let them therefore give us 2 bulls, and let them choose 1 bull for themselves, and cut it in pieces, and lay it on wood, and put no fire under it. And I will dress the other bull, and lay it on the wood, and put no fire under it. And call ye on the name of your gods, and I will call on the name of the Lord, and the God that answers by fire. Let him be God. And all the people answered and said, It is well spoken. And Elijah said to the prophets of Baal, Choose 1 bull for yourself, and dress it first. For ye are many, and call on the name of your gods, but put no fire under it. And they took the bull which was given, and they dressed it, and called upon the name of Baal from morning until evening, even until noon. So it was just morning until noon, saying, O Baal, hear us. But there was no voice, nor any that answered. And they leaped upon the altar which was made. And it came to pass at noon that Elijah mocked them and said, Cry aloud, for he is a god. Either he is talking, or he's pursuing, or he's on a journey, or maybe he's asleep, or must be wakened. And they cried aloud and cut themselves after the manner with knives and lancets, till blood gushed out upon them. And it came to pass when midday was past, And they prophesied until the time of the offering of the evening sacrifice that there was neither vice nor any answer or any that regards or no voice. And their God didn't talk, in other words. And Elijah said to all the people, "Come near to me." And all the people came near to him. And he repaired the altar of the Lord that was broken. And Elijah took 12 stones, according to the number of the tribes of the sons of Jacob, unto whom the work of the Lord came, saying, "Israel shall be thy name." And with the stones he built an altar in the name of the Lord, and he made a trench around the altar, as great as would contain 2 measures of seed. And he put the wood in order, cut the bull in piece, and laid it on the wood, and said, "Fill 4 barrels of water, and pour it on the burnt sacrifice and on the wood." And he said, "Do it a second time." And they did it the second time. And he said, "Do it a third time." And they did it a third time. And the water ran round about on the altar, and he filled the trenches also with water. And it came to pass as the time of the offering of the evening sacrifice that Elijah the prophet came near and said, "Lord God of Abraham, Isaac, and of Israel, let it be known this day that thou art the God of Israel, and that I am thy servant, and I have done these things at thy word. Hear me, O Lord, hear me, that this is your people may know that you art God, and that thou hast turned their hearts again." Then the fire of the Lord fell and consumed the burnt sacrifice, and the wood, and the stones, and the dust, and licked up all the water that was in the trench. And when all the people saw it, they fell on their faces and said, "The Lord, he is God. The Lord, he is God." Now, the story I just read is actually my favorite story in the Bible, because Elijah had no doubt about this, as he kept telling them to pour more water, and drench it, because we all know that things that are drenched don't accept fire quite as well. All right, now Exodus 14:21-31. If you've watched the movie, The 10 Commandments, you're familiar with this story. And Moses stretched out his hand over the sea, and the Lord caused the sea to go back by a strong east wind all that night, and made the sea dry land, and the waters were divided. And the children of Israel went into the midst of the sea upon the dry ground. And the waters were a wall unto them on their right and on their left. And the Egyptians pursued and went in after them in the midst of the sea, even all Pharaoh's horses, his chariots, and his horsemen. And it came to pass in the morning watch, the Lord looked unto the host of the Egyptians through the pillar of fire, and of the cloud, and troubles the host of the Egyptians, and took off their chariot wheels, that they drove them heavily. So the Egyptians said, "Let us flee from the face of Israel, for the Lord fights for them against the Egyptians." And the Lord said to Moses, "Stretch out your hand over the sea, that the waters may come again upon the Egyptians, upon their chariots, upon their horsemen." And Moses stretched forth his hand over the sea, and the sea returned to his strength when the morning appeared, and the Egyptians fled against it. And the Lord overflew the Egyptians in the middle of the sea, and the waters returned and covered the chariots and the horsemen, and all the hosts of Pharaoh came into the sea after them. There remained not so much one of them. But the children of Israel walked upon dry land in the midst of the sea, and the waters were a wall to them on the right and on the left. Thus the Lord saved Israel that day out of the hand of the Egyptians. And Israel saw the Egyptians dead on the seashore. And Israel saw the great work which the Lord had did upon the Egyptians, and the people feared the Lord and believed the Lord and his servant Moses. I will say, if some of you haven't read this story, the Egyptians got a lot of warning before this, so it wasn't like this just happened to them. Okay. All right. Now there's an interesting story about the miracle of the axe head that had fallen into the water, floating to the surface. It's in 2 Kings 6, 1-6. The company of the prophets said to Elisha, "Look, the place where we meet with you is too small for us. Let us go to the Jordan, where each of us can get a pole, and let us build a place there for us to live." And he said, "Yeah, go." Then one of them said, "Won't you please come with your servants?" "Oh, I will," Elisha replied, and he went with them. They went to the Jordan and began to cut down trees. And one of them was cutting down a tree. The iron axe fell into the water. Axe head, just the axe head fell into the water. "Oh, my Lord," he cried, "it was borrowed." The man of God asked, "Where did it fall?" When he showed him the place, Elisha cut a stick and threw it there and made the iron float. "Lift it out," he said. And then the man reached out his hand and took it. So anyway, they did get the axe head back. Okay, now we'll move on to one of the Apostle Paul's adventures, which he had many, many. Okay, Acts 28, 1-6. Once safely on shore, and this is after shipwreck, I think. Once safely on shore, they found out the island was called Malta. The islanders showed us an unusual kindness. They built us a fire and welcomed us all because it was rainy and cold. Paul gathered a pile of brushwood, and as he put it on the fire, a viper, driven out by the heat, fastened itself on his hand. When the islanders saw that the snake hanging from his hand, they said to each other, "This man must be a murderer. For though he escaped from the sea, justice has not allowed him to live." But Paul shook the snake off into the fire and suffered no ill effects. The people expected him to swell up and suddenly fall dead. But after waiting a long time and seeing nothing unusual happen to him, they changed their minds and thought he was a god. Most of these adventures from the Bible that I've shared were experienced by men, although there were some women crossing the Red Sea, of course. There were other women in the Bible who experienced an adventure. One of these women was Esther, who was born a Jew and was encouraged by her cousin Mordecai to come against the plot of the wicked Haman to save her people. Like the crossing of the Red Sea in the movie The Ten Commandments, the story of Esther is produced in a movie called One Night with the King. The book of Esther is only 10 chapters, so I encourage you to read it or watch the movie because even though it's only 10 chapters, it is too long for me to add to this program. So I'm just going to skip around through the main points and hope you get the whole story if you read it later. Okay, a bit of backstory is that King Ahasuerus, or King Xerxes, was king over a huge kingdom extending from Ethiopia to India. He made a great feast to display his wealth and material riches. He also planned to display his beautiful wife Vashti. However, Vashti refused the king's command to come. This really upset Xerxes and the men, as they thought it would encourage disrespect of wives toward their husbands. So Vashti was not allowed to come before the king any longer, and her estate would be given to someone else. All this happened in chapter 1 in the book of Esther. Now in chapter 2, a search begins among the young virgins for Vashti's replacement. When Esther enters the palace among these virgins, her Jewish name had previously been Hadassah, and she had been adopted by her cousin Mordecai as her parents were dead. The king was pleased with Esther, who did not show her Jewish identity, and she became queen instead of Vashti. Mordecai informs Queen Esther of a plot to kill the king, and it's written in the book of Chronicles before the king. Now in chapter 3, Mordecai refuses to bow down to Haman the Agagite, who has a position of authority given to him by the king. Haman is angry at Mordecai, but he also wants to destroy the Jewish people, of whom Mordecai and Esther are part of. By the influence of Haman, letters are sent to all the provinces of the king to destroy, kill, and perish all Jews, both young and old, little children and women, all in one day. In chapter 4, Mordecai learns of this and is in sackcloth and ashes, and the Jewish people weep, mourn, and fast. Esther's maid and her chamberlain came and told her. She and Mordecai exchanged communication then via her chamberlain, and Esther reads the decree to destroy the Jews. Mordecai urges her to go to the king and make supplication for her people. The penalty, however, for this was very severe. In verse 11 it says, "All the king's servants and all of the king's province do know that whosoever, whether man or woman, that comes to the king into the inner court who is not called, there is one law of his to put to death, except such as to the king holds out his golden scepter, that they may live." So Esther passes a message to Mordecai. She has not been called to come to the king for 30 days. Mordecai's answer is, "Think not that thyself, that thou shalt escape in the king's house more than all the other Jews? For if you hold your peace at this time, then shall all their enlargement and deliverance arise to Jews from another place. But thou and thy father's house shall be destroyed. And who knows whether you are come to the kingdom for such a time as this? Then Esther asked the Jews of Shushan and her maids to fast with her for 3 days. Then she says her famous line, which a lot of us have heard, I will go to the king, which is not according to the law, and if I perish, I perish. In chapter 5, Esther puts on her royal apparel and stood in the inner court, and when the king saw her, she obtained favor, and he held out his golden scepter to her, and she touched the end of it. He asked her for her request. However, she doesn't share it then, but invites him and Haman to a banquet which she has prepared the next day. Haman then goes home feeling joyful and thinking he has favor, but on the way he sees Mordecai in the king's gate who will not bow down to him. Haman brags to his wife and his friends about all the glory of his riches and how he is the only one invited to the queen's banquet. He expresses how all this doesn't avail him when Mordecai is sitting in the king's gate still. Haman's wife advises that a gallows be built for Mordecai and that he would be hanged. In chapter 6, the king couldn't sleep that night and commanded for the books of records of the Chronicles to be read to him. Then honor was given to Mordecai for exposing that prior plot to kill the king. Haman comes in where the king asks, how do I honor a man the king delights in? And of course, Haman thinks he's talking about him. So he recommends a man be really honored by wearing royal apparel and riding the king's horse. Then, to Haman's surprise, the king is referring to Mordecai to be honored. Then Haman goes to Esther's banquet. In chapter 7, at her banquet, where Haman and the king are present, she presents her petition, which is for her life and the life of her people. In verse 4, she says, we are sold, I and my people, to be destroyed, to be slain, and to perish. But if we've been sold for bondsmen or bondswomen, I had held my tongue, although the enemy could not countervail the king's damage. Then Esther tells the king that Haman is the adversary and the enemy. The king leaves for a short while, then returns to find Haman intending to harm Queen Esther. So Haman hangs on the gallows that he had built for Mordecai. Okay, interesting. In chapter 8, Mordecai is honored more and given the king the ring given to Haman, and Mordecai is set over the house of Haman. After this, the king set in place that the Jews were now allowed to fight against anyone intending to insult them, which is interesting because before, evidently, they couldn't even defend themselves. And this decree was sent to all the provinces. Then the Jews had gladness, joy, and honor. Now, since then, the 14th day of Adar, which is a Jewish calendar month, has been made a day of gladness and feasting and a day of sending portions one to another. This day is referred to as Purim and shows the accomplished adventures of a woman who began as an orphan child and was brave enough to stand up for the lives of her people. Hope you will take the time to read this book and other adventures I have mentioned, coming out of the pages of the Bible, and learn from them, and even better, that you will be brave and adventurous enough to embark on your own adventures with the Lord. You may not be the Daniel, the Paul, or the Esther in the Bible, but maybe you can be an adventurer of the Lord for such a time as this. Well, thank you again for joining me on Showcase of Churches. If you wish to view this program again, please Google Lucy Met Production, YouTube, and my show will come up. Thank you.